I was listening to some lectures by Richard Rohr. Some of you may know a Catholic priest. I've talked before about in religions there's the exoteric and the esoteric form of that particular religion. In all the major world religions, that's the case. And the contemplative tradition in Christianity is really largely ignored in favor of the sort of conventional view of religion and behavior and ethics and all that, and doing good works and what have you. Then when he started talking, and he was talking about, his whole lecture was about the true self and the false self. And he said that this is central to Christianity. And that without that understanding, a lot of the teachings just don't make sense. And I'm listening to him, and then I started thinking, and he made some references to some other religions in their traditions, and I'm realizing that this really has been around since the beginning in all the religious traditions in terms of in their mystical, the contemplative traditions from the very beginning. And it's just never been taught in Christianity until Thomas Merton came along. He was the one that started talking about all that stuff, and so I'm finding that it's a universal understanding in the contemplative traditions around the world. We have a true self, and a true self and a false self. And I chose the topic today. I was listening to lectures on AI. I just find it kind of very disconcerting because everybody has an opinion. There are a lot of opinions around and predictions about where things are going to go and how, that sort of thing. And I'm trying to kind of understand why it's such a confused conversation. I mean, all of the dialogues that I've seen, interviews, people talking with each other about the topic, why it's so odd and why there is so much conflict. And I realize everybody's coming from a different understanding of how the human mind works. That's the problem. And I'll get to that more of that in a second. Frank?
Yes, I think I understand what the true self is, presenting yourself as you really are. But the false self, does that mean playing a role or pretending to be something you're not, or lying about yourself? Or I don't really understand how these concepts fit into our life.
Good question. I appreciate that. Because from my perspective, particularly in the beginning, when being introduced to this concept, it takes a while to get oriented to it, because what the questions you raise are really the first thing we run into. What is this? How does it arise? What is it? How do I identify this in my subjective experience? The way I like to describe it is that we really only have, as a self, a true self. If we start there as an assumption or a theoretical hypothesis that when we're born human beings, the only real self is the real self, is the true self. And if we're not aware of the true self, we have to find some way of interfacing with the world. So this idea really was first introduced into psychology by Carl Jung. He talks about the persona. He said the persona is a mask that we use to protect our innermost selves from the world. But I think there's a lot more to be said about that, because we have to have some way of communicating who we are and interacting with the world. The problems arise when our identity is based on externals, meaning how many people like us, our position in life, whether we're doing something honorable in terms of the family name. Those are externals. So I've got this and I've got that. Life is great. Material accumulation of material wealth, power, whatever. And all that is of a worldly nature. Now, what is the worldly nature? The worldly nature is made up. right? It's called dualistic. It's made out of calculations. It's based in logic and rationality. It's about sensation. It's about trying to fit oneself into the world. And this is opposed to people who are part of a community where they simply belong. There's two different things there. Brene Brown said fitting in is completely different than belonging. And belonging is a function of the authentic self. Trying to fit in is an effort of the false self, because someone feels a basic insecurity about who they are and want to feel better by being around and identified with other people. But that gnawing feeling of I don't know really who I am is still there, particularly if they get kicked out of the group for some reason. Then it's a terrible experience for somebody who's trying to fit in and then they get ejected from the group for some reason. And so Donald Winnicott characterized the presence of the true self. The characteristics are spontaneity, which is an ease of action, creativity, resilience, humility, and I'm going to add to that wisdom, because wisdom comes from a type of mental function. No matter how good AI gets, there's no wisdom there. They can quote others. AI can figure out what our culture says is wisdom and what is not. But it has absolutely no idea how to really discern that on its own. So from my standpoint, AI is not capable of wisdom. It's capable of quoting wise people, but it has no idea how to really understand that or integrate it or work with it. If we had taken Facebook, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but this is one of an example of the lack of wisdom, is that in Facebook we said, somebody got the idea and said, oh, this is a really interesting idea, but this is going to affect a lot of people. Let's test it first before we unleash it on the world. And they did a study of, let's say, 100,000 people of all ages over 6 months or a year. Just that part of the population. And then they do a follow-up study on mental and emotional impact, social impact, and that sort of thing. We never would have had what we have now. Because of what we're realizing now, the profound impact it has socially and on families and relationships, and communities, and on the human psyche, and we're realizing that because it hasn't been safeguarded. What that's entirely built around is the false self. Some people use it like for their families, and they want to keep track of the grandkids or people around who live far away, family members usually, or friends. It's great, but most of it has had a super negative impact on particularly young people. So if we'd known that, and if we were prudent and we applied wisdom to the situation, we would probably have been a very different kind of development. The false self lacks wisdom. Let me put it that way. And the false self doesn't really know what to do, and will generally make decisions that really aren't very good. They're not all that creative. Tend to be very black and white thinking. And there's either or. There's good and bad. And you have to be on the side of good in order to be a good person. But the good side is different to different people, right? So it brings about this big mess. If it's a very dysfunctional family, let's say that the family culture is one way, but that's very dysfunctional, then to be a good kid means to be adherent to the family patterns, which makes, we take it from an outside look, that's crazy, but that's the way families work. So the false self, from my point of view, develops in the absence of the true self. Because as kids, when we're growing up, we have to figure out who we are in the world. We want to make a life. We want to create a life. We want to be part of the communal life. We have certain creativities and likes and dislikes. And I have one client, a young gal, who her mother told her all the time, said, you have to look good in one way or another. You have to look good. You have to do what you can to be appreciated by others. And that was the value system she got. And so she doesn't really know who she is now. She's slowly learning. But her only guideline in life was to fit in. But she didn't have any internal guidance as to what kind of career she would like to have. And so she all felt very negatively about herself. There's something wrong with her because all of her friends are getting married and having babies and going to school and all this stuff, and she didn't know what to do. So the true self can be illustrated in this way. There's one of my former clients was telling me, we were talking about vocation. It was a main issue in this situation. And he talked about his favorite cousin. And his favorite cousin was born into a family of nobody had gone to college. Some of them didn't even finish high school. And his cousin, she kept saying, no, I want to be in the music industry. I want to learn more about music. And they all said, nah, that's stupid. You can't do that. Yeah, you'll see. You'll go out there and you'll be a terrible failure. And they were really riding her all the way through high school. So she goes to a university that's noted for their music program, one of the best in the country, and she learns music engineering, sound engineering. And now she's an independent, and she does stuff all over the United States, very large productions, sound engineering. Somehow, even though it seems like nobody in her family, they're all in the false self, that she stayed in her true self and said, no, this is what I'm going to do. She had enough of a connection with her true self that said, no, this is what I need to do. And so it was intuitive, creative, spontaneous, and authentic. True self. Now most of us operate and sort of vacillate between the two. In one situation we'll be true to our true self. Another situation we'll go, well, I don't know, I kind of want to get along, and then we're not. Or someone will say something that we find humiliating, and then we're tossed back in our false self. My suspicion is, and I say that because I haven't really done enough reading on this to say it more definitively, but my suspicion is that shame can only occur in the false self. And I said that before. So somebody hears self, the negative self-talk of they make a mistake or whatever. I made that mistake way back then. I'm still so ashamed about that. All of that's false self. Because it all comes down to what would other people think. So if somebody's measuring themselves about what they think the general culture is, trying to fit into the general culture, that's an earmark of the false self. Now, how we become aware of that subjectively is really the question. Because we can talk about it philosophically all day long as a theoretical construct. But what happens when we start doing the mindfulness meditation is we begin to be able to discern the true self from the false self. Because in that space between thoughts, that's the authentic self. And we think that we grow up and the culture thinks that we just have one mind. Well, in a sense, we do. It's whether it's based in the true self or the false self. So we can create this idea of whom I am and go out and do that in the world because, we think that's going to be a great job or be prestigious or make a lot of money or my family will be proud of me. That's all false self-thinking because we're trying to fit in. If somebody goes up and says, look, I want to play baseball. Parents go, well, I don't know about that, and anyway, it turns out that they have talent. and they go out and they love baseball and they play baseball and they're really good at it and they have a lovely career. Well, that's out of the true self. Now they may have other issues, but basically, artists tend to, when they're creating art anyway, to be in their true self, is my belief. It's hard to test this now. I don't know how we can actually test this. It's like some artists seem to be entirely in their true self, like Andrew Goldsworthy is one, and there's quite a few, and writers as well. E. Cummings, and I've been thinking about him recently, and Mary Oliver is another one, really spectacular poet, and Rumi, obviously. That all of those are notes from the authentic self. When we start talking about this, if someone's not familiar with it, the initial challenge is, who am I? And that's a fundamental question. And it's a Hindu practice that spiritual practice where somebody sits in meditation and asks themselves the question over and over again, who am I? Over and over and over and over and over and over again until they get the right answer. In other words, and they have to toss out all of the false self notions along the way. And once you toss out all the false self notions, what's left is the true self. And that's how Ramana Maharshi, who is he was a brilliant saint, Hindu saint, that's how he attained enlightenment. He just came, who am I? Over and over and over again. Sounds pretty simple. I tried it for a while, a long time ago, and it's hard. It's really hard. But if we do that consistently, then we get the right answer. So I'm answering your question in a roundabout way because it's a central topic, but it's hard to understand because the world that we were born into is a world of logic and reason, and we think that's the world. So us being born into it, we think that's me too. So we think of ourselves as rational and logical human beings, and that we have just one self. That's me. That's who I am. When in point of fact, it's an amalgam. It's sort of a, we talk about the two wolves story in the indigenous traditions, where they talk about, and that's really, they're talking about the true self and the false self. You got the mean wolf and you got the kind wolf. And the kind wolf is the one that's filled with wisdom and creativity and spontaneity and connection, and that's where our true self is. That's where it doesn't matter. We're not really beholden to other people who want us to fit in, whether it's a family or a group or a job or an organization that we belong to. And people in their true selves just sort of naturally gravitate to places where they belong. But in the false self, we try to belong to places and things and people that in families that we don't really belong there. We can fit in, but we'll never really be part of that group because it's not, our authentic self isn't there. So I should have a postal warning, in these sessions that beware of asking simple questions. So I may go on for quite a while. But it's a difficult concept because we assume we have just one mind, and this is me and I've got one me. But in fact it's not true. Yes, Frank.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I understand a little better now.
Good. And experientially, that's why we do the meditation, because the meditation will help us to experience that, which is the most important part. See, when we're talking about the construct, that's a theoretical construct that helps us to be able to what's the word? How to integrate the experience. So experiences are hard to integrate, and that's why they're experiences, and then we've got to figure out how to talk about them. But when we're doing the mindfulness meditation, what we're really encountering is the authentic self. The more we're in that space of just sitting, just being, that's our true nature. That's our natural, what they call in Tibetan Buddhism, the natural mind. But we think we only have one mind. Well, it's not true. We only have one authentic mind, one natural mind. That's it. But we have all this other stuff built on it that we think we are, and we're not really. The Sufis of the West, they did these wonderful Sufi dances, and they had teachings that went along with it. And they would recite the teachings, and it was part of the dance. And one of them, there was a dance called "I Am Not My Body," which was really fun. But there was the basic concept is that the body comes and goes and something else survives. What survives? There's something in us that is intangible and seems to enliven us, our mind, our thinking, and our body. What is that? Where does that come from? Well, it doesn't come from the body. It's resident in the body, but at some point we're going to leave the body behind. So what is that? And that's kind of the question, and that's where in the contemplative traditions they ask that question: who am I? And the true self and the false self. The way Richard Rohr talks about it is very much the way we talk about it and Tibetans talk about it, is that our problems are because we feel this sense of alienation from our true self. And so we attempt to deconstruct our false self so that we can naturally more and more move into our true self. And he uses a religious context for that, which is God. We move more into God. And then in Tibetan Buddhism, it basically conceptual realm of all existence, so to speak. And I think they're seeing the same thing. But it's when we're not all bound up with these thoughts of good and bad and right and wrong and heaven and hell and all that, then we begin to see that that's just our logical mind. And things just happen. This is a while ago in ecology, it was known in ecology that a really healthy ecosystem with vegetation, trees, forests, that sort of thing, is periodically there's a forest fire, burns everything to the ground. And I thought, what's going on here? Well, they figured out that when an ecosystem reaches its maximum, it can't really change anymore. So there's a fire, lightning strikes and burns it down. And then all those nutrients and all that stuff goes back into the earth and replenishes the earth, and then the process starts all over again. So it wasn't bad. We look at it, we got to prevent fires. You say I don't want the forest to burn down. It's a little different now because the earth is so out of balance, but the idea is it looks like fire is bad. It burned everything. But in point of fact, that's part of the life cycle of an ecosystem. So false self would make the mistake we got to prevent fires. And the authentic self says, well, looks like it's about, after 1,000 years, about time for that to burn down. Not that I'm going to have anything to do with it. I'm not going to light the match. But something's going to happen to change the ecosystem so it can regenerate. So it has the false self has an either or, good and bad kind of mindset, and the authentic self thinks in terms of large systems. And so if you notice this when talking with people or talking with friends or listening to stuff on the news, and so some people speak in terms of large systems and how things change over time with a multitude of influences. Like I've been listening to a lot of talks, interviews with ambassadors who I just have a tremendous respect for, because they understand the amazing complexity of what they're dealing with, and so they can understand if this happens, how that's going to affect dozens of systems. And they're thinking in systems thinking. And systems thinking is very different than black and white thinking, logical thinking, so-called. So systems theory came in, in the 30s, I think, 30s or 40s. But it was a new concept at that time. And systems thinking is, I think of it as a property of the authentic self. So I guess I can go on about that, but I wanted to get to the analogy with AI, because I was listening to some people talking, very smart people talking about AI, and a guy named Michael Pollan, Pollan, who's pretty interesting. I don't agree with everything he says, but he's got a really good perspective, and one worth listening to, I think. But I realized, how do you describe AI to somebody? Because the sophistication is enormous in terms of gathering data. You ask it, how do you bake a cake, or why is the speed of light constant? You'll get an answer. And you have a complex business question. If we do this, and 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 we want this outcome, what's the best path? So you get an answer. Whether it's a wise answer or not is up for question. But you will get an answer. There was a fellow who was a motivational speaker a long time ago in business, and he said at one point they were trying to figure out this. They had an issue with certain markets, so they loaded tons of data, all the variables they could think of, into a computer and let it work on it for a while. And what they got out of it didn't work. It couldn't really. Now that could be the limitation of the computers at the time, but the idea is that rationality will never work as a leading method. It'll come close, but it will always break down. And the way I see the discussions about AI is that the people who are most for it are probably the people who are most solidly ensconced in the false self. And it comes down to people developing robotics. And they'll bring out a robot that can dance or respond to the other person. Or the more realistic it gets, the more accolades it gets. So what is that? That's sort of like all these false self people look what we can do. Here we are. This is sort of a reflection of us and how wonderful we can make things. So I really see what's going on with AI is really just an outgrowth. What makes it possible is there's so many people living in their false self, and they think somehow this is wonderful. And they get to the point where they're insecure because the false self fundamentally knows it doesn't really exist. That underlying insecurity drives people to want to be more secure but maintain their false self. And that's what all the awards and the money and the prestige and what other people think come in to help the false self feel okay. But it only lasts, as we've talked, something like somebody wins a gold medal or sell their company for a bunch of bucks. That satisfaction only lasts maybe 24 hours, because the false self can never really feel secure because it fundamentally knows it doesn't really exist. It's the false self. Only the true self knows that it exists, and it's fine, and everything's just fine. You don't like my true self? That's okay. So that's why I use the analogy with AI, because AI is I think a really good analogy, and I think it's really come about by virtue of the fact that everybody in their false self brought this into being. I mean, it didn't come from the Dalai Lama or the Zen tradition or the contemplative tradition say, what we really need to do to help humanity is build this artificial intelligence. They have no interest in that. And so the predominance of false self thinking is really, in my opinion, is what's causing all these problems. The ecological problems, for somebody who's a system thinker, dumping garbage into the ocean or nuclear waste or chemical waste into the ocean is insane. I'd never do it. It's like people throw cigarette butts out the window of their car. That's false self-thinking. Well, it doesn't matter, it's just a little cigarette butt. And whereas somebody in the true self goes, no, what are you doing? You need to take care of your own garbage. And throwing it for other people to pick up. The reason why I wanted to present the idea of AI as being a production of the false self is to help point to what the differences are subjectively that we have and experiences we have of our authentic versus our false self. So in decision making, wow, we're way over time. I've been talking a lot. I just checked the time. So we're going to basically do a mindfulness meditation and extended, and then finish up with a compassion exercise. I'm hoping that all this helps us to be able to understand subjectively more what we experience, because we've all experienced both, where we don't really without the nomenclature, without being able to identify them, it's hard to do that. So maybe this will help in our subjective experience to understand what's kind of going on inside us. So I guess we'll begin now. Places, everybody, and we'll begin. So just easing down into the present moment or wherever you're sitting, perhaps noticing the points of contact with the chair or the floor, and allowing as best we can the thoughts of the day up to now or what may come, letting those flutter away. And as they arise, we can notice the thoughts as they arise and release them and come back to just sitting. And we can use the breath as a place to park our rest and settle our awareness, self-awareness. Or we could use the whole body. Or some people use the sounds around them as a way to maintain presence in the moment. And as we do this, continuing to ease into stillness. And if the mind is very busy, taking a couple deep breaths may help. Because a part of us really likes being still. Like a flat stone settling on the bottom of a lake. And allowing things to be just as they are, whether we have any physical pain or discomfort, or our mind may be jumping around, whatever we experience, just letting it be as it is without having to do anything about it. And as we do this, each time settling a little more, gravitating towards stillness. And when thoughts arise, whether they're obvious or subtle, just recognizing them and releasing them, and returning our awareness to right here, right now. And when we have an impulse to do something about whatever arises, other than letting go, recognizing that as well, and letting go of that as well. And sometimes our mind doesn't want to settle down. Perhaps a part of us doesn't want to feel ignored, or whatever that may be. And that's okay, that's just what's going on in our mind. But recognizing even that as a thought. And in realizing it, releasing it, and returning to just sitting. Just being. And as we continue to settle, just letting go each time our awareness is moved to a different place. And we return it to just right now. And we may not be used to coming to a place of rest and stillness that does not lead to sleep, but to being awake. And if our mind wanders off, and it takes us a little while to be aware of it, no matter, just recognizing, releasing without criticism or judgment, and returning to the present moment. And settling into the silence. And settling into the stillness. Just as it is. And continuing to release ourselves into stillness. And we may begin to get the idea that this present moment awareness is spacious. And perhaps noticing that in the present moment there are no burdens. And allowing ourselves to regenerate in a sense with our true nature, our true being. And in a very real sense, treating ourselves with this deep kindness. And allowing ourselves to absorb this experience as best we can, as fully as we can. Like our body and our mind, our whole being, absorbing it like water is absorbed by a sponge. An indelible presence. And letting that set in as best we can, so that in the moment when the bell rings again, we can bring this with us as we go about our day. And come back to it at any time.